Hello everyone, Leo here, Chilean physician and science fiction author, and first of all, thank you very much for the 100 subscribers. If you haven't seen it, I made a video dedicated to that. Small celebration with Hulky, a very cute video, so you can check it out if you haven't already. But this video in particular, it's gonna be about one special book that just came out 2 days ago, Mundos Alternos. And this book, the important thing about this book is that it's an anthology that's gonna be, I think, a very important book to mark a specific period or to represent an important point in terms of the history of Chilean science fiction and fantastic literature in general, as other books in the past have done this. So that's why I think it's important. I think this book in particular is one of those books that you remember that are important in terms of historical value. I admit that I haven't personally read all of it. I mean, it just came out, but I do believe that it's gonna have that importance. And so this book, as I said, it's in its name, it particularly says an anthology of fantastic literature. And we know that the fantastic literature, it's not a simple concept. I mean, it's easy to separate it from the realistic literature, but in terms of what's inside within the fantastic literature, you know, the frontiers between the subdivisions, this get kind of tough. But as it happens in South America and Latin America in general, you know, within the fantastic literature, science fiction, fantasy, horror, weird, and all those different kind of subdivisions, it's not always easy to separate them, and we all know how hard it is to get to a consensus or to a definition in terms of science fiction or speculative fiction on whatever the term is going to be. So this video is not going to be about that discussion, although it's a very important, it's a very passionate one. I love that. I love the dialogues about how can we understand or define certain topics in literature in general. But for the purpose of this, we're gonna talk about the fantastic literature with a predominance of science fiction, at least in terms of the literary movement or the cultural movement in which it's constructed, you know. Science fiction itself is not something isolated, so sometimes you gotta talk about the fantastic literature. So we're talking about that. Recently, I talked about the history of Chilean science fiction with some friends from Colombia. There is a video about that. If you wanna practice your Spanish, if you know Spanish or you wanna learn Spanish, you can go watch it. It's the longest talk, I think, recorded that I've given about the history of Chilean science fiction. I try to represent all of it, so it's a 2-hour talk. I know it's long, but I want to eventually make an English version of that, because the video about Chilean science fiction that I do have in my channel, it's only 15 minutes long and it's a simplified version. I think it's a good version to just get in touch with it, especially if you're not a Spanish speaking person. But in that 2-hour talk, there are a lot of interesting things that I would like to eventually have in English to tell to the rest of the world. And one of the things that I have in that discussion, in that talk, is that, I mean, the Chilean science fiction and the fantastic literature, you know, it's all mixed up. You can talk about it from 1875 to now, 2020. And we'll probably find some older books later on, but it's a whole period. It's a big period. Chile has a very rich tradition, and what a lot of academics and historians and people that know a lot about this, we try to represent certain periods. We have some consensus about many of them, but we don't have a solid classification. But I did a 7 periods of time, so I'm gonna put them here. Maybe I'm gonna translate them just to let you know, because sometimes I'm going to tell you that certain books represent or are in a certain period, and I'm talking about those periods of time, okay? Because I'm going to tell you about other books. So let's rewind of what I wanted to say. So new book, very important, an anthology that's going to represent this period of time. Mundos Alternos. And this anthology, the general editor of it, it's Professor Wilbert Gallegos Riquelme. And this book was made possible by the Chilean Literary Association of Science Fiction and Fantastica, ALCIFF by the acronym. So ALCIFF is the Chilean society dedicated to this, and it was recognized by Locus magazine, just in case you were wondering. So it's important because the latest period in terms of Chilean fantastic literature, one of the things that it's important to describe this last stage of it, it's the presence of ALCIFF. There had been other associations before, but this is the current one, and this is the first manifesto in a way that comes from it. You know, a book to represent the moment, to mirror the moment. Of course, I have an ALCIFF shirt, right? Okay, so ALCIFF, the Chilean Association, was founded in 2017. It works with a central directory consisting of 10 members. I'm gonna show you a picture of the people that form the first directory. It's gonna be right here, 10 people. And right now, there were some elections a couple of weeks ago, so we have a new directory made of 10 people, and within those 10 people we now have also a president and a secretary and treasury and a vice president and all that I'm going to show you here too. And now it comes this book, Mundos Alternos. So the main message I want to give in this video is, if you know Spanish, go check it out. If you don't know Spanish, if you can't speak or read in Spanish, it's okay. I just want to let you know that this exists. I think that's the main purpose of this channel. I know people are not going to be reading Spanish if you're not involved with this scene most of the time, but I want you to know that this is it's a new thing happening around. It's a new book. And it has that importance. And also it's not only a Chilean book, because it also has Laura Ponce from Argentina. She's a very well known author and editor. She's an amazing editor and writer. And also it has Cristian Londoño from Ecuador, also another very important figure from his country that's also a very good friend of us in Chile in general. So this anthology in a way also tells about this union, or at least this growth of the community, at least in South America, which I think is something really good, something really nice. Okay, so Mundos Alternos, go check it out, go find something about it. If you have any questions in particular that you want to ask me about the book, you can ask me, and when I read it in the future, I guess I'm going to talk to you about this book again. I've talked to you about this new book, Mundos Alternos. I've talked to you about ALCIFF and how important it is. And the last thing I want to do, just to make this video informative and just to talk about something else, to put this into perspective, I wanted to tell you about which are the important anthologies in terms of the history of Chilean science fiction and fantastic literature. So let's talk about important anthologies. This one, first anthology I'm going to mention as the first one to be really important, I think, to Chilean science fiction history and fantastic literature, you know, okay. So this one, first anthology to be mentioned by Andrés Rojas Murphy, and this one, you know, the important thing about this one is that it contains the authors of the almost golden era, very important period in Chilean science fiction history back in the 50s, and it has authors from all the way to the 80s. So what this anthology does is to be the first kind of representation of what was going on at that time, and from the 50s to the 80s, you know. This book in particular is from 1980, and let me show you something here. there, you can see that it says it's signed, that, you know, it's the first part of the book. It's signed by Andres Rojas Murphy, and it says there that at the time he was signing this, he was the president of the first Chilean association dedicated to this kind of literature, the Club Chileno de Ciencia Ficción, or the Chilean Science Fiction Club. So this comes to be the anthology of the first Chilean science fiction group society dedicated to this. So it's a very important thing. The next very important anthology is this one, Años Luz by Editorial Puerto de Escape. I have a video about them too. So what's important about this? This one was in charge of Marcelo Novoa, and this comes to be another very important book. This came out in 2006, and it has authors from all the way back to the early period of Chilean science fiction. I mean, even before the other anthology that I showed you. So this one would gather people from stories from the 1930s all the way to the early 2000s. So that's important of this one. And then this one in 2006. In 2007 there came another one that I don't have physically, but this one, Alucinaciones.txt, and that one represented the contemporary situation of science fiction and the fantastic literature at that time. And that came out in 2007. Then many years came by, and I would say that then we have to mention two more anthologies dedicated to the fantastic literature. And these two in particular were not particularly focused on science fiction. It was also relevant for those anthologies to put some fantasy and horror as well. So these two anthologies to mention are, the first one, another one that I don't have physically, but it's important here, Fantástica by Biblioteca de Chilenia, and Imaginarias by Triada Ediciones. Those are the name of the publishing houses. And what's important about these two books, these two anthologies, that are anthologies written entirely by women. And so it was a very important thing. It's a very important thing to mention. Then what came next? Then I would just mention this one, this COVID-19 CFCH. And what's important about this is that it gathered 25 writers, contemporary writers, and it's an anthology of science fiction dedicated exclusively to the pandemics, to the COVID-19 situation. So it really marked something important as well. And after all of these anthologies that I've mentioned, from the Rojas Murphy, Años Luz, Alucinaciones.tx, Fantástica, Imaginarias, COVID-19, then we get to Mundos Alternos. So I really encourage you to go check it out. And once again, this video was about telling you about the existence of Mundos Alternos, about ALCIFF, our association, and to let you know just a little bit of the most important anthologies in terms of the history of Chilean science fiction and fantastic literature in general, or Fantastica, or however we're gonna call it. Okay, so once again, I hope you liked this video, and that's it. See you around. I think you're gonna laugh. I'm gonna show you what was I using to hold the camera. Now I'm using my hands, but okay, so here's my computer, right? And what I was using was this. I'm sorry. I mean, I want to buy something, but this is the best I had right now. So let me show you. So I put the cell phone here. You see? So I got perfectly angled. So what do we have here? This is an old box of Chilean Pisco. And I put some pencils going all the way through it. Let me show you here. See? So the pencils go all the way around, so they make these holders, but it was too slippery, so I put some this thing, masking tape, to hold the phone, and inside it was some candle holder to make some weight. So what do you think? That's my thing, to hold the phone. I mean, it worked awesomely. Well, all the things that I've used have been handmade, homemade, like this. In the other videos I use other stuff, but they have all been homemade. I don't have anything fancy yet. I will, I guess. Well, but that's it.